I signed the lease on our new apartment on a Tuesday. By Wednesday morning, my wife was gone. She took most of the money from our joint account and left behind three things: an empty suitcase, a signed divorce paper, and her 20-year-old disabled sister sitting on the sofa, staring at nothing. No call, no explanation, just a sticky note on the kitchen counter in her handwriting. Take care of Sophie. I can't. 7 years later, when I walked into a room she never expected me to enter, she went pale. Not because of me, because of who was standing right behind me. Before I tell you what happened in that room, I have to take you back to the beginning. Reed Mercer was 31 years old, mechanical engineer at a mid-size firm in Columbus, Ohio. He paid his bills on the first of the month. He was the kind of man who measured twice and cut once, who never raised his voice because raising it had never solved anything. He wanted a life that made sense, and for a while, his marriage to Lindsay Hartwell had been exactly that. Lindsay was a pharmaceutical sales rep. She was sharp, in a way that made other people feel slow. She could walk into a room of strangers and have them nodding along to her opinions inside 10 minutes, even the ones who had disagreed 5 minutes earlier. She climbed fast. She always had a plan. When Reed married her, he remembered thinking he had found a person who would never let their life fall apart. He admired her. He was also, if he was being honest, a little afraid of her. Then there was Sienna, Lindsay's younger sister, 20 years old. Sienna had been born with a condition that left her dependent on a wheelchair and on daily assistance for the basic tasks. Their parents had died in a car wreck when Sienna was 16, and Lindsay had been her legal guardian ever since. When Reed and Lindsay got married, Sienna came with the package. She lived in the spare room of their apartment. She was quiet as furniture. She rarely spoke unless spoken to, and even then her answers were short and careful, like she was measuring how much space she was allowed to take up. Reed wants you to understand something. He cared about Sienna. He helped with her transfers when Lindsay worked late. He drove her to physical therapy. He bought her books when she mentioned, almost in passing, that she liked mysteries. But underneath all of it, he believed Sienna was the Hartwell family's responsibility. He had married Lindsay, not her sister. That Wednesday morning, Reed woke up to a half-cold bed. Lindsay's side hadn't been slept in. Her closet was open and half empty. Her toiletries were missing from the bathroom. The divorce papers were on the kitchen table, already signed on her side. The note on top, yellow post-it, 3 words and a confession dressed as a command. Take care of Sophie. I can't. He called her cell 14 times. Every call went straight to voicemail. He sent texts. The angry one, the confused one, the one that just said, "Call me." Nothing came back. He called her office. The receptionist told him Lindsay had submitted her resignation 2 weeks earlier. 2 weeks. While Reed had been comparing apartment floor plans, asking her where she wanted the couch, Lindsay had already been gone in every way that mattered. Reed drove to Monica Cale's place. Monica was Lindsay's best friend. She opened the door and her face told him she had known. She said Lindsay had asked her not to say anything. She said she was sorry. She closed the door. By noon, Reed was sitting at his laptop, scrolling through their joint account history. The money had been moved out in small transfers over the past month. 300 here, 500 there, amounts low enough that he had not once flagged them. What was left wouldn't cover 2 months of rent at the new place. He sat down at the kitchen table. The divorce papers were in front of him. Sienna was in the living room behind him, unmoving, and the picture finally assembled itself. Lindsay hadn't snapped. She had engineered an exit. The lease he had just signed, the slow drain of the savings, the resignation 2 weeks back, all of it was scaffolding she had built, so that by the time he opened his eyes on Wednesday morning, every door out was already nailed shut. He turned and looked at Sienna. She was sitting in her wheelchair near the window, hands folded in her lap, her face turned toward the glass. She had heard the phone calls. She had heard the edge in his voice as he made the 10th, the 12th, the 14th attempt. He walked into the living room and sat down in the chair across from her. She looked at him, not with sadness, not with confusion, with recognition, like she had seen this exact ending before, and she already knew her part in it. She had been left before by the same blood. She knew what came next. For 3 days, Reed barely slept. He left the divorce papers on the kitchen table like a bomb he hadn't decided whether to defuse or detonate. He went to work. He came home. He cooked dinner for two and sat across from a girl who ate in silence and never once asked him what he was going to do with her. Sienna didn't beg. She didn't cry. She didn't try to make herself useful enough to justify her place. She just existed in the apartment the way she always had, carefully, quietly, like someone who had learned a long time ago that the less space you took up, the less likely someone was to throw you out. On the fourth day, Reed's co-worker Greg Halsey took him out for a beer. Greg asked him what he was going to do. Reed said he didn't know. Greg said there were programs, group homes, state-supported facilities. He wasn't her brother. He wasn't her father. He had no legal obligation. Greg said it gently, the way people do when they're giving you permission to do the thing they think you already want to do. Greg wasn't wrong. Legally, Reed owed Sienna nothing. One phone call, a few signatures, and he could walk away clean. No one would have blamed him. That night, Reed drove home long after dark. He sat in his truck for 10 minutes before he could go inside. When he finally walked through the door, he didn't head for the bedroom. He went into the small office off the living room and opened a folder on his hard drive he hadn't opened since 2017. Inside was his diploma. Massachusetts Institute of Technology, 2009, Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering, with a minor in patent law. There were 6 United States patents, all filed under the name Reed Mercer. Mobility assistance systems, wheelchair transfer mechanisms, robotic elbow joints for users who had lost upper body function, automated lift architecture. He had been the principal engineer at Halverson Aerospace in Boston on a Department of Defense contract for veteran rehabilitation, $4.2 million in budget the year before he left. He had walked away in 2017, 3 months after his father died. His father had been an Army medic who came home from Vietnam in a wheelchair. Reed had spent his career trying to design devices that would have made his father's days easier. Then his father was gone, and Reed couldn't sit in a Boston office designing equipment for strangers anymore. He moved to Columbus. He took a quieter job. He stopped telling people what his old job had been. Lindsay had never known. Sienna had never known. Reed stared at the patents on the screen and felt the old ache come back. He closed the folder. When he walked out of the office, Sienna was sitting in the hallway near the front door. Not in the living room where she usually stayed. Right by the entrance. Like she had wheeled herself there to see whether he was going to come home at all. She looked up at him, and he saw the thing that decided it. It wasn't gratitude. It wasn't hope. It was terror. Bone-deep, practiced, recognizable terror. The kind that comes from already having been left once, from already having survived it, and from knowing you might not survive it twice. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Reed closed the door behind him. He set his keys on the counter. He sat down on the floor next to her wheelchair. He didn't make a speech. He didn't promise her anything large. He said, "I'm not going anywhere, Sienna." She turned her face away. Her shoulders shook once, just once, and then they went still again. Reed sat on that floor for a long time after that. He thought about the 6 patents on the hard drive. He thought about his father. For the first time in 2 years, he understood something he had been trying not to understand. He had run from designing mobility devices for strangers, and now the universe had set down a person in his hallway who was not a stranger. He didn't know if it was coincidence. He knew he wasn't going to call social services. The first thing Reed learned was that good intentions don't fill out government forms. Within a week of Lindsay's disappearance, he was sitting in a Franklin County office across from a caseworker named Denise Vrabel, trying to explain why a man with no blood relation to a 20-year-old disabled woman should be granted temporary guardianship. Denise looked at him over her glasses like he was either a saint or a suspect, and Reed honestly couldn't tell which one she was leaning toward. She told him the process would take time, background checks, home evaluations, paperwork. Until it was finished, Sienna lived in a legal gray zone, and Reed had no authority to make medical decisions on her behalf. The financials were worse than he thought. After Lindsay emptied the joint account, he was left with about $1,800 and a lease on an apartment that was not wheelchair accessible. The hallways were narrow. The bathroom had no grab bars. The front entrance had 3 steps and no ramp. It hit him later. Lindsay had been the one who toured the apartment. She had gone alone on a weekday afternoon, signed off on the layout, and told him it was perfect. At the time, he had thought she was being efficient. Now he understood. She had picked an apartment Sienna couldn't live in because she had already decided Sienna wouldn't be there. The first month, Reed carried Sienna up and down those 3 steps twice a day. Once in the morning for therapy appointments, once in the evening to come home. She weighed barely 100 pounds. By the second week, his back was screaming. He couldn't afford to move. He couldn't afford to stay. He was trapped in the exact position Lindsay had designed for him. Sienna's therapy schedule alone was a logistical disaster. Physical therapy 3 times a week, occupational therapy twice, a monthly specialist appointment across town. Each copay was money he didn't have, and that didn't include the equipment, replacement cushions for her chair, new leg braces, adaptive utensils she needed to feed herself. Reed started picking up freelance drafting work at night, after Sienna went to bed. He hunched over the laptop until 2 in the morning, designing machine parts for companies he would never see, billing by the hour. Sometimes he fell asleep at the kitchen table, his face pressed to the keyboard. One of the freelance contracts came through a staffing firm. The client was Halverson Aerospace, his old company. They didn't know R. Mercer, contract drafter, was the man who had been their principal engineer 2 years earlier. He used the shortened name. He was drawing detailed components for a project he himself had led, redesigned now by someone else. He took the work because the rate was good. He never told anyone. The neighbors whispered. His co-workers asked careful questions. His mother called from Florida and said, "Reed, sweetheart, you are not responsible for that girl." Like Sienna was a stray dog he had picked up out of a parking lot. Strangers were the worst. The cashier at the pharmacy saw him pushing Sienna's wheelchair and asked if she was his daughter. The man at the hardware store watched him load a portable ramp into his truck and said, "Your wife make you do all the heavy lifting?" Reed never corrected them. He didn't have the energy. He paid for his items and left. Through all of it, Sienna said almost nothing. She got up when he said it was time. She ate what he cooked. She sat through her appointments without protest. But the silence wasn't cooperation. It was the silence of a person who believed she was the reason someone else's life was collapsing, and who had decided that the least she could do was disappear inside herself so that she wouldn't make it any harder. He caught her one night at the counter, looking at the divorce papers. Not reading them, just looking. Her face was completely blank. When she noticed him watching, she wheeled herself back to her room without a word. He moved the papers into a drawer after that. He couldn't move the look on her face. The first year ended. The second one began. Life had a rhythm now, even if the rhythm was exhaustion. The temporary guardianship had been finalized. Reed had moved them into a ground-floor apartment in Grandview Heights. Wider doorways. A roll-in shower. A driveway with no steps to fight every morning. The change started small. So small Reed almost missed it. One afternoon, Sienna's physical therapist, a woman named Renata Caldwell, called him. She said she wanted to share something. She said Sienna had started asking questions during sessions. Not big questions, things like, "Can I try that stretch on my own?" Or, "What would happen if I practiced this at home?" Renata said, "In 2 years of treating Sienna, that's the first time I've ever heard her initiate a conversation about her own care." Reed didn't know what to say. He nodded into the phone and drove Sienna home. After that, the changes got bigger. Sienna started using the adaptive kitchen tools Reed had bought months ago and left on the counter. She taught herself to make scrambled eggs, then toast, then full sandwiches. She wheeled herself out to the mailbox at the end of the driveway every morning. Such a small thing. But she had never done it before. Lindsay had always collected the mail. One evening, Reed came home and found Sienna at the kitchen table with her laptop open, scrolling through online graphic design certificate programs. She looked up at him. "I think I want to try this," she said. 4 years with Lindsay, and Sienna had never once told anyone what she wanted. 6 months with Reed, and she was beginning to find out. Reed understood something he had been too tired and too angry to see before. Sienna didn't need someone to carry her up steps and fight her insurance company. She needed something simpler and harder. She needed someone who treated her like a person with a future, not a problem to be managed. Lindsay had taken care of Sienna the way you take care of an obligation. Efficiently, dutifully, with the quiet resentment of a person who had never agreed to the job. Reed was far from perfect. But he had done one thing differently. He had asked Sienna what she wanted. And that question, it turned out, was the door she had been waiting for someone to open. By the end of the 3rd year, Sienna had finished the online graphic design certificate. She was taking on freelance clients, logos for local businesses, layouts for a nonprofit 2 streets over. She did her own physical therapy exercises every morning without anyone reminding her. She still rarely raised her voice, but she laughed now, sometimes. Real laughter, the kind that filled a room instead of hiding from it. Sienna was not Reed's sister. She was not his daughter. She was not his obligation. She was a person who lived under his roof, and every day that passed, she was not recovering. She was appearing. For the first time in her life, 4 years with her sister, she had learned to disappear. Now she was learning the opposite. Reed thought the hardest part was behind them. He was wrong. At the end of the 3rd year, a letter arrived from a law office. The letter stated that Lindsay Hartwell Caro was seeking to reassume caregiving responsibilities for her sister Sienna Hartwell, citing improved personal circumstances and her deep concern for Sienna's long-term welfare. It requested a meeting to discuss a transition. Reed read it 3 times. The floor seemed to shift under him. 3 years of silence. Not a phone call, not an email, not a birthday card. And now she wanted to take back the role she had thrown away in the middle of the night. He called his lawyer, Dwight Pratt, the man who had walked him through the original guardianship paperwork. Dwight told him that as Sienna's biological sister and former legal guardian, Lindsay had a credible claim, especially if she could show that her circumstances had changed and she was fit to provide care. Family courts tended to favor blood relatives. He told Reed to prepare for a long process. Reed asked what Lindsay's real motive might be. Dwight was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "In my experience, people don't come back for the person. They come back for the story." Reed sat with that. He thought about the image Lindsay had built. The exhausted caregiver, the woman who had sacrificed and finally broken. Taking Sienna back would complete the narrative. It would prove she had always intended to come back once she had healed. It would erase the abandonment. Reed didn't tell Sienna right away. She was doing too well. Her freelance portfolio was growing. She had started laughing again. He was afraid of what the news would do to her. She found the letter herself. He had left it tucked into his briefcase. She needed a pen from the front pocket. She read it at the kitchen table while he was at work. When he came home that evening, Sienna was sitting in the hallway by the front door, the same spot where she had waited for him 3 years earlier. But this time, the look on her face was not terror. It was something harder, older. She looked at him and said, "She doesn't get to do this." Lindsay's legal push was more aggressive than Reed expected. Within a month, she had retained Marcus Pellman, a family attorney in Columbus, and filed a formal petition to modify the guardianship order. Her filing painted a picture Reed barely recognized. Lindsay, the devoted older sister, forced to step away due to a mental health crisis, had since undergone therapy, had rebuilt her life, and now wanted to provide Sienna with the family connection she deserved. There was a section in the filing Reed had to read twice. It alleged that he had isolated Sienna from her biological family and that the original guardianship had been obtained under circumstances that warranted review. Lindsay had moved to Charlotte. She had remarried a man named Trenton Caro, a real estate broker, and presented herself as a financially stable, emotionally recovered woman with the resources to give Sienna a better life. On paper, she was a second chance. On paper, Reed was a 35-year-old single man with no biological tie to the woman he was fighting for and a freelance income that fluctuated month to month. The court did not know about the small bank transfers, the staged disappearance, the lies Lindsay had told her friends about him. All the court would see was a sister who wanted to come home. Lindsay's attorney requested a home evaluation of Reed's apartment and an independent assessment of Sienna's living conditions and emotional well-being. 2 social workers showed up on a Wednesday afternoon. Professional, not unkind. But the questions had an edge, like someone had coached them on what to look for. They asked Sienna if she ever felt restricted in Reed's home. They asked her if she missed her sister. They asked her if she had been encouraged to say negative things about Lindsay. Sienna answered every question quietly and honestly. But Reed watched the old fear creep back into her shoulders, the way her eyes dropped to her hands, the way her fingers tightened in her lap. She was 24 years old, and two strangers in her kitchen were asking her to justify where she lived and who she lived with. That night, after the social workers left, Reed sat alone in his truck in the driveway and stared at the steering wheel for a long time. 4 years of rebuilding from the wreckage Lindsay had left behind. Money, time, sleep, the career trajectory he had once imagined for himself. And now, with one legal filing and a polished story, Lindsay was threatening to pull it all apart. If she won, Sienna would go back to a woman who had already proven she could walk away without looking back. And the woman who had just started laughing again, who had just started building a portfolio, who had just started leaving the house without being asked, would learn the lesson Lindsay had been teaching her since childhood, that she was something to be picked up and put down at someone else's convenience. For the first time since Lindsay left, Reed was afraid he was going to lose. The following week, a stack of mail came to the apartment. Inside one unmarked envelope was a copy of a social worker's report. There was no return address, no signature, just a slip of paper folded inside. "You should see this. A friend of Sienna." The internal report had been written by one of the two social workers who had come to the home evaluation. Her name was Caitlin Harrow. Her notes were directly contrary to the official report that had been filed with the court. She had interviewed Sienna alone in the bedroom, and her observations read, "Subject demonstrates exceptional independence and emotional regulation. Stated multiple times, she does not wish to relocate. Concerns regarding alleged isolation appear unfounded. Subject maintains active freelance career and external professional relationships." The official report submitted to the court had been rewritten by Caitlin's supervisor after, the documentation noted, input from Marcus Pellman. At the bottom of the page, in handwriting Reed did not recognize, were 5 words. "Some of us have been watching for a long time. R. Renata Caldwell, Sienna's physical therapist." Sienna had told her about the home evaluation. Renata had reached out to Caitlin Harrow, an old friend from a social work training course, and gotten the original notes before they were buried. She had never told Reed any of this. Reed did not use the report as a weapon. He understood it was telling him something else. It wasn't just him and Sienna standing in this fight. There were other people who had been watching Sienna for 7 years, and they were starting to step forward. That Saturday morning, he drove to Renata's clinic. He did not bring the report. He just sat in the waiting room until she had a free 15 minutes between patients. He said, "Thank you." Renata didn't confirm. She didn't deny. She just set her coffee cup down on the counter and looked at him. She said, "I've been watching Sienna for 7 years. She changed because someone stopped asking her to change. I'm not going to let anyone take that away from her without people standing up." Reed nodded. He drove home with the windows down even though it was October. He understood now. The fight was not Reed versus Lindsay. The fight was Sienna in the middle, and a quiet circle of people who had chosen her without ever needing to say so out loud. The legal battle stretched through the 5th year and into the 6th. Depositions, motions, evaluations, continuances. Each one cost money Reed did not have and sleep he could not afford to lose. Dwight kept telling him to stay focused, let the process work. But somewhere in the middle of the 6th year, Reed started losing the thread of why he was fighting. At first it had been clear. He was protecting Sienna. But after every filing from Lindsay's side landed like a slap, after every allegation painted him as a controlling stranger who had taken advantage of a vulnerable young woman, something darker started crawling in. Reed wanted to win. Not just for Sienna. He wanted to beat Lindsay. He wanted to stand in a courtroom and watch her story collapse on itself. He wanted her to feel what it had been like to lose everything in one morning. He started thinking about the patents. If he walked into court as the principal engineer behind a Department of Defense-recognized mobility assistance system, his profile changed overnight. He stopped being a freelance drafter with shaky income and became a leading expert in independent living for the disabled. Lindsay would be flattened by the contrast. He wrote a draft brief. Full background. MIT. Halverson. The patents. Dwight read it and said, "This ends the case in one hearing." Reed sat with it for 3 nights. One evening he was at the kitchen table with the file Dwight had sent over. Bank records, employment history, the timeline of Lindsay's transfers, and he was talking out loud, almost to himself, about how they could use a specific piece of evidence to prove Lindsay had been planning her exit for more than a year. Sienna was across the table working on a freelance project. She set down her stylus and looked at him. It wasn't fear. It wasn't the shrinking silence of those first months. It was the look you give someone you care about when they are walking somewhere dangerous and don't know it. "Reed," she said, "I need you to hear something." He set the papers down. "If you go in there trying to destroy her, you're going to use me to do it, and I don't want to be used again. Not by her, not by you." The sentence hit him harder than anything Lindsay had ever done, because Sienna was right. He had been so focused on exposing Lindsay that he had stopped asking Sienna what she actually wanted. He had started treating her the same way Lindsay always had. A piece in someone else's game, a symbol to be positioned, a story to be told. The only difference was that Lindsay had used Sienna to justify leaving, and Reed was about to use her to justify his anger. Different motive, same result. Sienna would end up as evidence in someone else's argument instead of the author of her own life. Reed sat at the table for a long time after she said it. He didn't have anything to say back. She was right, and they both knew it. That night, after she had gone to bed, he called Dwight. "I want to change our approach," Reed said. "No offensive strategy. No background brief. I'm not going to use the patents. I want to walk into whatever hearing the court schedules and do one thing only. Show them who Sienna is now, and let her speak for herself." Dwight was quiet for a moment. "That's a risk. Judges respond to evidence, not philosophy." "Sienna's life over the past 7 years is the evidence," Reed said. "If that isn't enough, then nothing is." He hung up. He took the draft brief, the one with MIT and Halverson and the 6 patents, and he deleted it. Then he opened his trash and emptied it. He was not going to use his own past to save himself. He was going to let Sienna's present do the talking. 6 weeks before the hearing, Reed and Sienna stopped trying to build a case. They started building a portrait of a real life. Sienna called Renata. Renata had quietly, over the past 5 years, completed her certification as a disability advocate. She had been preparing long before anyone knew she would need to. She agreed to serve as Sienna's independent care coordinator at the hearing. Renata connected them with Janelle Corbin, a disability rights attorney based in Cincinnati. Janelle had taken dozens of cases like Sienna's pro bono. She listened to the story over the phone, was silent for almost a full minute, and then said, "I'm going to drive up. I want to meet her." Janelle's first meeting with Sienna lasted 4 hours. She didn't ask about Lindsay once. She asked Sienna about her design work, about her clients, about how she got her own groceries, about what she wanted to be doing 5 years from now. At the end of the meeting, she stood on Reed's porch and said to him, "She's ready to speak. You just need to stop speaking for her." Sienna had also, Reed learned, applied to Patrick DeSoto's independent living program at the Franklin County Center for Independent Living. She had been accepted 6 months earlier and had not told him. She had wanted to prove she could do it on her own. Patrick agreed to testify. He brought a detailed independent living proposal, a supported apartment 12 minutes from Reed, support services, long-term goals, all signed off. The night before the hearing, Sienna was at the kitchen table with her laptop, working on her statement. Reed sat across from her. He didn't read over her shoulder. She typed alone. She looked up. "Reed, do you want to hear it first?" He shook his head. "No, it's your voice. I'll hear it the first time with the court." She nodded. She kept writing. Reed went out onto the porch. October. Columbus was cold. He thought about his father, the Vietnam medic in the wheelchair, who had died 2 years before Reed had ever met Sienna. He thought about the 6 patents he had decided not to use. He realized something he hadn't seen before. For 7 years, he had thought of himself as the one who chose to stay. But the truth was simpler. Sienna had chosen to stay with herself. She had decided not to disappear anymore, not to shrink, not to be a piece of furniture in someone else's life. Reed had only been the person who happened to be standing close enough to witness it. Inside, Sienna printed her statement. 1 page. She read it once, folded it in half, set it on her wheelchair next to her bag. She came to the porch door. Right? Yeah. Thank you for sitting down next to my chair in the hallway 7 years ago. Tomorrow's going to be the first time I stand up without anyone needing to sit down for me. He didn't turn around. He knew if he did, he would cry. He just nodded into the dark. I know, Sienna. I know. Tuesday, October 2026. A small courtroom in Franklin County. Fluorescent lights, plastic chairs, the kind of room that made everything feel temporary. Lindsay was already there when Reed arrived. New coat, careful makeup. Trenton sat behind her in the gallery. Marcus Pellman had a thick folder open on the table. She looked like a woman who had rehearsed this moment for the better part of a decade. Reed walked in. Sienna wheeled in beside him. Lindsay's eyes went to Sienna first. Something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe, at how different Sienna looked. Healthier, steadier, a posture that hadn't been there before. But Lindsay recovered quickly and looked past Sienna toward the doorway behind Reed. That was when her face went still. Walking in behind him was Renata Caldwell. Beside Renata was Janelle Corbin, and behind both of them, Patrick DeSoto, holding a folder. They were not there to attack Lindsay. They were not there to argue Reed's case. They were there for Sienna. They carried nearly 7 years of documentation between them. Therapy progress reports, the transcript from the graphic design certificate, samples of her freelance design work, a financial plan showing her independent income, a signed independent living proposal endorsed by professionals who had watched Sienna change from a silent girl who was afraid to ask for a glass of water into a 27-year-old woman building a life on her own terms. Lindsay looked at the 3 people behind Reed. He saw the recognition spread across her face like cold water. This was not what she had prepared for. She had prepared for a fight between her and Reed, 2 adults arguing over who got to control Sienna's future. But Sienna's future was not theirs to argue over anymore. Sienna had built it herself, and she had brought the people who helped her build it to prove it. Marcus Pellman opened his folder. He began to make his case, but the air had already gone out of the room. Every point he made about Lindsay's readiness to provide care was answered by a simple fact. Sienna did not need Lindsay's care. She did not need Reed's either. She needed structure and respect, and she had already found both. Janelle spoke for 12 minutes. She never raised her voice. Renata spoke for 8, with a progress chart spanning 7 years. Patrick spoke for 6, and held up Sienna's acceptance letter. When the judge asked Sienna if she wanted to address the court, Sienna said yes. She wheeled herself to the front of the room. She spoke clearly, without notes, and she did not look at Reed or at Lindsay while she spoke. I am grateful to Reed for choosing to stay when he had every reason to leave. I understand my sister struggled, and I am not here to condemn her. But I want to say this clearly. I am not a burden someone carries, and I am not a prop someone uses to tell their story. I have my own story. I am asking this court to let me live it. The room was quiet. Judge Margaret Quinlan set down her pen. It took her 4 minutes to write out her ruling. The petition to modify the guardianship was denied. Sienna would continue under her current independent living plan. Outside the courthouse, on the sidewalk, Lindsay stood by the curb. Trenton was already walking toward the car. Reed did not approach her. She did not approach him. When Reed and Sienna passed her, Lindsay looked at her sister. Really looked. Maybe for the first time in years. Reed saw something break behind her eyes. It was not anger. It was not embarrassment. It was the weight of a fact. For 7 years, she had been running. She had left Sienna behind because she had told herself Sienna would always be a burden, and the only way to survive was to let go. Now Sienna was in front of her, steady, employed, having spoken for herself in a courtroom. And the lie Lindsay had built her entire escape around was standing right there, dismantled, without anyone needing to say a single word. Lindsay left that day. Reed didn't know where she went. He didn't follow up. He didn't call. He didn't try to get the last word. He didn't need to. Revenge was never going to give him what he actually wanted. What he wanted was for Sienna to be safe, to be respected, and to have the chance to decide what her own life looked like. She had all 3 now. Not because of him, because someone had finally stepped aside and let her lead. A year passed. October 2027. Sienna was 28. She lived in a supported apartment in Grandview Heights, 12 minutes from Reed's place. She designed logos and brand materials for small businesses. She called him every Sunday evening to talk about whatever she was working on. Reed had gone back to engineering, not Halverson. He opened a small consulting practice in Columbus, designing low-cost mobility assistance equipment for low-income households. The first patent he had filed back in 2017, the wheelchair transfer mechanism, he released under an open license so any manufacturer could use it without paying him a cent. His father would have liked that. Renata had opened her own clinic. Janelle had taken on 2 more guardianship cases in Ohio. Patrick had invited Sienna to speak at an independent living fundraiser. She agreed. She didn't need notes anymore. One Sunday afternoon, Sienna drove herself to Reed's place for dinner. She used a modified vehicle. The transfer mechanism was one of the systems Reed had designed. She brought one thing with her, a small wooden plaque Renata had helped her paint. 5 lines of text in steady, careful handwriting. I am not someone's burden. I am someone's story. SH 2026. She set it on Reed's kitchen counter. She didn't say anything. Reed didn't need to be told. They ate. Sienna told him about a new project, a logo for a Cleveland nonprofit working in disability rights. Reed listened. Sienna isn't my sister. She isn't my daughter. She isn't my obligation. She is a person I chose to stand beside when no one else would, and who, in return, taught me something I didn't know I needed to learn. The people this world calls burdens are only burdens when we refuse to see them as human beings with the right to choose, to grow, and to live with dignity. Lindsay had asked me to take care of Sienna. I never did. I just sat down beside her in a hallway one Wednesday and stayed long enough for her to take care of herself. Some people leave with goodbyes. Some people stay without them. The ones who stay, they don't ask to be remembered. They just keep showing up on Sundays.